This is a special report on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now reporting from Studio 24, here's Mahieash Johnney.
Good evening. This is a World News special report on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, the invasion began on Thursday after President Vladimir Putin announced the assault. This is what we know so far. Blasts are being reported in Kiev today, with a Ukrainian official saying that the country's capital has been hit by cruise or ballistic missiles. Russian forces are now about 20 miles from Kiev, according to top U.S. officials. After Russia began its assault on Thursday, it quickly spread across central and eastern Ukraine as Russian forces attacked the country from three sides by land, sea and air. Leaders from the United States, European Union, Australia and Japan announced harsh new sanctions against Russia, but it seems to be falling on deaf ears. As you saw, a comprehensive report on World News Tonight just moments ago. Right now, we want to dive deep and understand this crisis and what it means to the world, to our region, to Sri Lanka. We know we are expecting oil prices to skyrocket during this crisis. If you look back at events, just as diplomats at the last-minute United Nations Security Council meeting were pleading for peace, Russians' fire began raining down on Ukraine on Thursday. On a haunting night marked by an address from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that felt like an eulogy for a democracy. Decades of peace between the nations on the European landmass ended with loud blasts in multiple Ukrainian cities. And within hours, live stream video showed a column of military vehicles streaming into the country from Belarus, where Russian troops was based. One of the biggest questions we have right now is why on earth President Vladimir Putin wants to attack Ukraine.
Historically, Ukraine was a part of the Russian Empire and Soviet Union until its dissolution in 1991. After the Soviet Union's dissolution, Ukraine gained independence. Ukraine's crucial positioning in the far corner of the former Soviet Union placed it in between Russia and the rest of Europe. Ukraine's gradual drift towards the West did not sit well with Vladimir Putin. Putin adopted several measures to prevent the westernization of Ukraine. The first being the invasion of eastern Ukraine intended to destabilize the country. The systematic invasion of Eastern Europe began with the Russian-backed separatists seizing territory in the region. Although it didn't initially spark much of a response from Ukrainian forces, the rebels shooting down Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, killing 298 people, 283 passengers and 15 crew members, triggered a strong response from the Ukrainian troops. This prompted Russian troops to step in to support the rebels, and at present Ukraine is divided, with the West being biased to Europe and the East, whose population is one-third Russian, being ruled by rebel leaders. These rebel leaders control two regions, namely Donetsk and Luhansk, who together form the Donbas region. The second method of preventing westernization of Ukraine was through the former president Viktor Yanukovych, a pro-Russian, allegedly corrupt figurehead who was put in place to propagate anti-Western sentiments. Yanukovych backed out of an EU trade deal that could have led to further European integration. This decision sparked national protests known as Euromaidan, which were intended to get Yanukovych out of power and to get Ukraine to agree to the EU trade deal. Russia backed Yanukovych and the West backed the protesters. Once Yanukovych was driven out in 2014, the native Russians in Ukraine expressed their displeasure. As a response to this, Russia annexed the pseudo-Ukrainian peninsula in the Black Sea, Crimea. In 1954, the Soviet leaders transferred Crimea to Ukraine from Russian rule. This move was intended to foster amicable relationships between the two countries, but proved counterproductive. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, sovereignty over Crimea became a point of contention. Even though Ukraine gave Crimea special autonomy, Russia maintained military bases there conditioned upon respecting this autonomy. Russia's response to Yanukovych's ouster was a violation of this condition, as the Russian troops on the ground in Crimea began taking over governmental buildings. This, followed by a referendum on the 16th of March 2014, a referendum of which the legitimacy is subject to heavy speculation, found that the people of Crimea wished to become a part of Russia. This was the backdrop for the 2014 Minsk Accord, which settled on a ceasefire agreement and Ukraine agreeing to hold elections in the rebel-controlled Eastern Territory. However, to this date, the Minsk Accord has not been honored. From a geographical aspect, Ukraine is appealing to Putin given that it is the second largest European country in Europe, spanning 603,550 square kilometers. Additionally, eastern Ukraine is rich in coal, fertile land, and iron. From a demographical point of view, every 1 in 6 citizens in Ukraine is Russian, and every 1 in 3 speaks Russian as a native language. In this context, the current president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky's anti-Russian sentiments, coupled with NATO's expansion and possible integration of Ukraine as a NATO member, has triggered Putin's response. This is supplemented by the bolstering his domestic ratings received when he annexed Crimea, because it was a step towards restoring Russia's image as a global superpower.
Well, that was a look at exactly why President Vladimir Putin, Russian president, wanted in order to go to Ukraine and try to get you a background into this whole conversation we're going to have tonight. To get some context tonight, I have with me Dr. Harinda, Vidanage, head of the Department of Strategic Studies at the Kotelawala Defense University. Good to see you once again, Harinda, after a very long time.
Yes, after a long time.
Yes, well, we are meeting once again when there's a crisis in the world. Last time when we were talking about COVID and the impact of it and how exactly foreign relations among the nations would work. Things have passed. Here we are now. We've surpassed the COVID stage and we are now talking about war. Before I get into the whole, dissecting the entire issue, what I want to know from you, are we looking at World War III?
I think from a point of view of Russia, I think the current invasion, I don't know, I'm not too sure whether they wanted a World War III. I think what the Russians wanted, if you can clearly see from the way the operation is unfolding, it's a swift, precise strikes on the key strategic locations, and basically Russia is looking at the strategy of what we call demilitarization of Ukraine. So that's the military objective. The political objective parallel to that, which I feel is a complete change of government. So the Russians probably are using full military force. This is a very much of a conventional approach to, it's not seen much these days. This kind of a conventional but very well planned, sophisticated, precise attack. So they knew exactly where to attack, what to use. So there was a panoply of missiles, airstrikes, special force contingents, heli strikes, and they didn't strike many civilian targets. They targeted all the what we call strategic assets, critical strategic conjunctures of Ukraine. And parallelly now they are quickly trying to march into Kiev. So which is a very clear signal that that's what they want is a complete change of the government.
I mean, we are actually recording this program at around 5 o'clock, 5:30 in the evening today, and by the time that this is airing at around 10 o'clock in the night, I'm pretty sure the Russian troops would be in Kiev at the moment. No, that is very crucial, isn't it? The capital falling, like we saw in Afghanistan, when the Taliban marched into the capital Kabul, it's pretty much game over for the whole of the United States, their troops, the coalition forces. Yeah. Is that the same case here? Because we don't see much retaliation from Ukrainian forces, despite the fact that there was some kind of a battle here and there, but there is no calculated effort like the Russians to counter it.
Yeah, I think that there are two scenarios here. One is that the fact that the Russian military might is just too overwhelming. Number two is whether the Ukrainians have an alternate strategy, which I feel is not purely sui generis. I think that probably may be generated by the Western interests. Looking at all the military aid that had gone to Ukraine the last few months, building up to that. So most of that is for close quarter combat or to maintain kind of an insurgency. So which are anti-tank weapons, anti-tank missile systems, man-pads. So those are not used in confrontations, it's not the tanks or anything, but it's the ability to sustain an insurgency. So, well, that probably maybe what the West might prefer. So that is basically creating an Afghanistan or an Vietnam for the Russians in Ukraine. So that's to be seen yet. So from the Russian side, I think that's the intention is quickly to occupy Kiev. Yeah.
But now let's start off. I mean, this is not an issue that started yesterday or a week back. We saw what happened in Crimea back in 2014. Now they annexed it. At that time, when Putin was once again back in power at that time, he said the reason we are doing this is because apparently the people in Crimea wants Russia to take back their land, and that there is a lot of people who wants to be part of Russia. He's using that same argument this time around as well. He's saying the rebel-held areas, which the Russians are supporting, apparently the Ukrainian people wants to be part of Russia again. But where did this issue really start? Like, what was the catalyst event that made Putin to say, at this time of day and age, when there's a pandemic going on, the economy of many countries are completely destroyed, he thinks, no, I need to march into Ukraine and take this country over. What exactly made him do that?
I think if you look at the historic factors, I don't want to go into 100 years of history, but the history starts from the end of the Cold War. From the end of the Cold War, when Soviet Union started losing all the peripheral states, one of the crucial states that they lost was Ukraine, because Ukraine was organically connected to Russia, because the heart of the trade, heart of the military industry, so all the MiGs, the MiL helicopters, the MiGs, that's all hard or Ukrainian. So I think the agreement was that Ukraine will remain pretty much like a hinterland of Russia. But things quickly changed within 10 years. If you look back, most of this contention started in 2004. That 2004,
yeah, not 14.
No. 4 is what we call the event where you saw the first change of government, which was a pro-Western government come in, and where you call and a political uprising which was supported very much by the West. The Russians are very bitter about it, and it's called the Orange Revolution. Mm-hmm. Orange Revolution is where it started from, but. That was probably, and that started what we call the westward drift, and it parallels certain developments from the Western side. That is, which the Russians have been against since the end of the Cold War. Russia preferred NATO. They thought NATO would pacify the West, but they didn't expect a NATO expansion, because a NATO expansion was not needed when the Soviet Union ended, because the NATO exactly was set up to contain Soviet Union. But what happened with subsequent American administrations, starting with Bill Clinton, was this what we call the NATO expansion drive. The Russians bitterly opposed this, and the drive happened first in 1999. So Poland, most of these countries started, Czech Republic, they started coming into NATO, and that continued for another turn in 2004. And parallel to that, internal political composition, political alignments of so-called Eastern European countries, mostly in the countries in the what we call the crush zone. Crush zone is the countries where Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Belarus. So which actually borders.
Which were actually part of the Soviet Union.
But they're called the crush zone because they're just sandwiched between Western Europe and Russia. So their alignments also started to change towards the West. That alarmed Russia.
There's a lot more to discuss, but before that I want to take a short commercial break. You're watching the special report of World News on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We'll be right back. Welcome back everyone to our special coverage of World News special report on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, as of now, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense called on those living in Kiev, northern outskirts where the tanks were filmed. They've seen lots of Russian troops advancing to Kiev. If Kiev falls, that means high possibility that this entire crisis will come to a halt for the moment, but then again the political implications of it and the back and forth with all the other supporting countries in the region that will start off, and I think all parties wants to keep minimum impact to civilians on this crisis. Joining me for tonight's conversation is Dr. Harinda Vidanage. He is the head of the Department of Strategic Studies at the Kotelawala Defense University. We've been talking about, Doctor, with regard to what Russia has done thus far, and we know that Kiev will fall, and there's no much plans by the Ukrainian side to defend their capital. So is that it? If they capture Kiev, is this whole thing over now?
Yeah, if Kiev falls, I mean, which is very likely, it will be the end of the first stage of the invasion. But I think, Mahieash, what we have to be concerned about is a couple of things. One, invasions are by great powers such as Russia, or US. They have always been swift. If you remember Afghanistan, the Americans took it in 21 days. And last year, the Taliban took it back in 14 days. So invasions can happen very fast because as long as you have the conventional might, military might, and when you have the will to defend, which is quite low, and when you have the invasions can take pretty fast, and the outcome, of course, will be a decapitation of the existing regime. But does that mean what comes after? Are the Russians going to militarily occupy Ukraine? Occupations have been the thorny point. The Americans have got so bogged down in Iraq, they got so bogged down in Afghanistan, so they had to, the whole withdrawals are because of the unintended consequences of trying to occupy. Occupation is a totally different thing. So I perceive the Russians knowing they have learned their lesson well early in Afghanistan in the late 80s of the cost of occupation. I feel they would look for a quick change of regime. So basically regime change, the same formula the Americans started to use in Iraq and Afghanistan, and to create a pro-Russian regime. But they will surely dismantle all military capabilities, which means ground defense, air defense, or take over.
Why is that? Because does Russia think that Ukraine is a threat militarily?
No, Ukraine became a threat few years back when Ukraine wanted to gain the membership of NATO. That was crossing a red line, or basically it was it's like crossing the Rubicon for Russia. You didn't want a NATO ally on your eastern front. So that was a no-go. And I think I feel a little bit sad also. I think Ukraine got led into this conviction that they would be admitted. And now they remain not admitted, and they believe that the people who wanted to admit, the NATO countries wanted to support them, might support them. That's not going to happen because there is no way.
That's exactly what I also wanted to know. Now, we see Russia in the recent times, they went to Crimea.
Yeah.
Did whatever they want, and then we later on saw the United States just slapping some embargoes, things which was very ineffective in the minds and eyes of the Russians. This is happening again. Now, do you think that this is happening now in Europe? Do you think that other European nations would come to the rescue of Ukraine and start fighting alongside Ukraine in order to get rid of Russia? Or what exactly do you envisage would happen in that? Or would they just, it's your issue, you guys try to sort it out kind of a attitude?
So I think none of them. So everybody had a voice for Ukraine, but I don't think nobody is going to die for Ukraine. So that's a big difference between. So and because they're not an ally, they are not an alliance member. So nobody has so the alliance can go to the defense of anybody else, and their member states, by evoking Article 5 of NATO, which is they are threatened. If not threatened, if they are invaded, then they are all they have to, or they are obliged to respond. There's Article 4, little known Article 4, which Lithuania yesterday was trying to invoke, which they said, if a member state feels threatened, they could take action. So Lithuanian argument was, Russians will not stop at Ukraine. They might move towards countries like Lithuania and Estonia. So on that pretext, they tried to invoke Article 4, and the NATO member states have not accommodated that request. So which means NATO literally is not going to be backing. And to add something quickly, NATO does. I firmly believe NATO countries do not have the military capabilities yet to deal with the Russian military capability is quite enormous. So sometimes people are, experts argue the NATO is outgunned, outmanned, and outranged by Russian capabilities.
One of the other things that we really need to understand is, did President Vladimir Putin had an agenda in terms of getting some kind of a message across to the West? Because there was always this conversation from America, the EU, the NATO alliance, all telling, don't do this, don't do this. And no sooner you tell Russia not to do that, that's exactly what they're going to do. Like earlier on, we had this conversation as well. It feels like a trap. It feels like Russia is doing exactly what the West wants, because this has some kind of cascading event later on. What happens today might not be the end game.
Yeah. So we can look at it from two perspectives. One, this trap perspective, because what you can argue is, so one of the challenges NATO and the United States had with Russia, the United States had with NATO itself, was NATO was almost in tatters, especially during Trump administration. If you remember, Trump went berserk on accusing NATO countries of not paying. NATO countries are supposed to pay 2% of their GDP as a membership kind of their contribution. I think only 3 member states could make the cut. 85% of NATO budget is put by the American money. So Trump, I think, was pragmatic there, but he's not pragmatic enough to see the imports of the security alliance. So because of that, it was very much destabilized. So for Biden, getting the NATO countries back on the fold probably entails kind of creating a common enemy where all of them feel threatened. So in that case, Russia's invasion is a bit of a good news for NATO. But the problem then is, so for NATO, so I think if you look at the military's aid that has gone into Ukraine, as I earlier said, it looks like they would prefer creating a bit of Afghanistan for Russia in Ukraine. But that's yet to be seen. But the other side of it, from a Russian perspective, I think it's a very opportune moment for Russia. Not just Russia, there is a new axis of countries coming together. It also signals a very significant shift in power distribution of the world, and especially the pandemic has aggravated that. The West is becoming quite weak. EU is not in the best of its term.
Is it though? Because I try to understand from a pandemic point of view. Let's take about economically. One thing we knew was China was dominating. China, I think last time when you were here, when we had this conversation, then China was, becoming the superpower of the world. Now here we have the pandemic, and then all the money of the world has now been pumped towards the West on the guise of vaccinations and trying to get all these entire healthcare aspect of things. And now the money is just gushing even from countries like Sri Lanka. We're just paying all American companies. Now the economy is starting to boom. Do you think that particular argument that we had prior to COVID, where saying, West is losing its power militarily, economically, they don't have the money now, did that really change? And right now, are they coming back very strong after the pandemic?
No, Mahieash, I still think the West is having a serious set of problems that are, if you look around the issues, consequences of Ukraine-Russia thing, I think one problem the West is having, when I say the West minus the US, vis-a-vis Russia, is that Russia is a net provider of energy security, energy guarantees to the West. So there is no way most
Mainly
Western
to European Union.
where European Union can just slap sanctions, cut Russian gas supplies, and try to depend on any other source. There's no way they can do it. And already you can see the energy prices are going up. This is since the last 4 months. If you look at Spain, most of the northern European countries have seen 400, 500, and certain countries had seen 600% increase in energy prices within their domestic markets.
This is fuel, gas,
mainly
everything.
Natural gas, gas for heating mainly, and we are still in kind of the late winter, moving into spring. So the dependency these countries have on Russia and Russia on them. So for example, Germany-Russia relationship, France-Russia relationship, they just can't take a moral high point on ground on Ukraine and totally ignore Russia. Neither can Russia ignore Germany or France, the big two, even Netherlands. So what you're seeing is, and Europe, if you look at the European situation, look at Britain. There is no concert in Europe. Concert in Europe meaning the kind of camaraderie working together in Europe. And the Americans are facing this problem. So keeping the Europeans in one fold. And the geopolitical West is still in crisis. They thought India was in their terms, but yesterday India just cancelled a massive drone deal with the United States. So and India is very clear, for certain strategic reasons we are with you, but don't think we are going to toe your line. So India will not totally support. I don't perceive India supporting a massive sanction on Russia.
I want to come into this region as well, because the whole conversation we are having is trying to understand where exactly Sri Lanka fits into this. Obviously, we are not part of that whole global conversation with Russia, the Ukraine, and the rest of the world. But we are going to definitely get hit by this. That is pretty much our story is going to be. So one key thing that we are going to look at very quickly and very recently might happen is fuel prices. We might see the oil prices are going really high as well. So obviously, as a repercussion of that, we might see high fuel prices. The country is going through an economic, I don't know what even to call that, because it's really tough at the moment. The government trying to do a balancing act, and here we are literally adding fuel to the fire. How do you analyze this whole thing?
Yeah, my approach is a bit different from the world. Yes, I see two crises. One, energy crisis, energy security crisis. The two, food security crisis. I think one of the biggest things we are missing in this conversation is the fact that we focus so much on fuel, on gas, on Russia, because that is the Western narrative. West is worried about the gas. I think us, of course, we have to worry about the gas, the oil, but we have to worry about a major staple, that is wheat. Russia and Ukraine together probably are the largest wheat producers in the world. Ukraine, I think, and Ukraine probably accounts for 1/4 of wheat produced. And I don't know that you people know this. 25% of Bangladeshis rely on Ukrainian wheat. 30% of Indonesians rely on Ukrainian wheat. About 28 to 30% of Malaysians rely on it. 50% of all Yemenis rely on, 50% of all Lebanese rely on the wheat coming from Ukraine. So it's an Asian Middle Eastern food crisis that we are looking at. Because if 1/4 of the supply of the global wheat produce is cut, it will inflate the wheat prices into abysmal levels, and that's going to create a significant crisis for us.
Indeed, that's actually a side that we did not think about. Let's take a short commercial break. You're watching the World News Special Report on the Russian invasion on Ukraine. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to our special coverage of World News Special Report on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm in conversation with Dr. Harinda Vidanage, the head of the Department of Strategic Studies at the Kotelawala Defense University. There is a country that I want to talk about, which is very crucial for Sri Lanka as well in this whole conundrum of things, China. We did not hear much from China on this. They made a couple of statements that they are, watching very closely what's going on, this and that. But then there is this pact between Russia and China in cahoot. They had a fallback way back in the past, but now they have renewed their relations, and here we are. We don't see China meddling with Russian affairs or Russia meddling with Chinese affairs. How do you see China's play in this? What are they doing in there?
Probably sometimes the major benefactor from all the whole fallout can be China from this particular event. That's why I was trying to tell you earlier, we looked at, from an American perspective, they might feel, okay, we have trapped the Russians. But from a Chinese perspective, the Chinese may have given assurances so far as for Putin to accept. And so for Putin to do such a thing, Putin also is a calculating person. He's not totally rational. So for China to get Russia to disregard existing forms of international laws, existing forms of regulation, norms of statecraft, and to invade a sovereign country, and not to even use the term invasion. None of the Chinese official responses carry the term invasion. Invasion is used by all Western media, and of course we carry the term. Of course, it's an invasion, because when you cross into a sovereign country using military, that's an invasion. But that is a term China is not using, Iran is not using when they are commenting on the development. So it feels like as if China is seeing this as the catalyst for a new world order.
Yeah, that's what I was also. All these countries that the West has agitated, are they coming together and trying to utilize this particular moment in time and history, trying to figure out, let's change the narrative. The West has been dictating every single thing in this world. Let's change the narrative. Is that something we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think it's getting there in a way that Russia is a Western state.
Yes.
It's just not a geopolitical Western state. When we use the term West globally, people misunderstand. We always say Batta Hira Kumantra and all this. That is what we call geopolitical West. That is the Americans, the Western Europeans probably can sneak in the Japanese, maybe the Australians. But Russia is still a Western country. So here a Western country is challenging the geopolitical West political, ideological, legal hegemony, right? And that benefits whom? That benefits, of course, the rising power, which is China. And China and Russia has recently been working closely together, especially through their Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They have been holding a lot of military drills together. They have been looking at exploring and sharing areas such as the Arctic, right? So China is, of course, flexing its muscles across North Africa and Middle East. And Russia has finally managed to stall the American dominance in the Middle East through Syria by consistently keeping the Assad regime safe. And Russia has been a key player in politics in North Africa, such as as Libya. And Libya has, there are two major power groups in Libya, and Russia has been supporting one. So likewise, for the first time after about 56, in the recent past, you see the Western world order that was established after the end of the Second World War with firm American and Western European dominance, that it's not ended, but the erosion has been accelerated. It's been eroding for some time. And even the American scholars are arguing that, Stephen Walt, a very significant realist scholar at Harvard, has just come out and said the West has sleepwalked into this crisis. They have sleepwalked into this crisis.
Biden, his response, what do you think about that? Because we had prior Trump. Trump was very vocal about it, and he actually had good relations with Putin, and they actually had some peace going on during their tenure. Here we are with the rhetoric coming from the Democrat Party and the liberal thinking, that entire clan, and accusing Russia of various things. Is Biden a weak president on this?
Biden was very much involved in most this NATO expansion. I don't know whether people, the institutional memory, Biden has been a key proponent in the expansion of NATO in the past American administrations. Even as Obama's vice president, he was very crucial. He played a critical role in doing these negotiations, traveling in Europe, speaking to Ukrainians. So he had a political investment which goes beyond his and preceding his presidency. So I think what the Americans are also struggling is to articulate a coherent viewpoint, because I think they also are surprised first and foremost by the shock and awe of the operation. I think they didn't expect this precision, this speed, something they normally would use, but which has come upon them. And now they are left with saying harshest sanctions. But sanctions do have significant limits.
I mean, we saw after the Crimea invasion, nothing. Russia didn't even feel it. I mean, here we are the second time. If those sanctions really worked, then Russia should be, rethinking this entire advance. But that never has happened. Do you think, putting that kind of rhetoric, talking with the harshest words possible, is generating any type of response from these types of countries? Yeah,
this is where I think China is crucial. I think Russia feels a little bit assured that some of these sanctions can be circumvented by the Chinese. And they are very, and I'm sure they know the pragmatism, the fatalistic determinism that they are the second largest natural gas producer in the world, third largest producer of oil. So who can isolate them? Well, for short term, yeah. But do you think the Europeans want to go for alternative gas? Where can they source that kind of gas? Who's going to provide them? There are about 7-8 American companies. None of them can bring the volume into Europe. That will take another decades to build the infrastructure. The Russians have the infrastructure, and strategically for both sides, that is important.
For us, Sri Lanka, we will always look at what India will do. India is now sitting in the middle of all of this: Russia, China, and then the remaining West. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was very close with former President Donald Trump. They had a very good relationship going on, and they shared similar views and sentiments when they were pretty much dictating world affairs. We don't see the same with Biden. How do you see India's role in this?
India's role will be crucial, but India also has a very strong relationship with Russia. If you look at India's strategic interest, India's military, if you look at the military infrastructure as well as the inventory, 60% of the military inventory still is Soviet Russian origin. So I don't think India can afford to totally cut down any form of trade or defense relations with Russia. Of course, there is a surge of defense relations with the US, but still they have suddenly cut down on certain deals that they have agreed, and they have diversified. They never bought the American F-15. They went for the Rafales from France. So India, but still with Russia, if you have a 60% inventory of Russian origin, you think India would want to go for serious disconnections with Russia? And the Indians will always say, it's very interesting to see how the Indian foreign policy has been shaped, especially with Jaishankar at its helm. He's a brilliant strategist, as well as is a good student of international relations and a good scholar of international relations. He says India acknowledges that it is a diverse and a different world, a complex world. So India understands taking sides in a complex world creates more complexity. So India would be very pragmatic, very prudent in shaping its relations with Russia as well as the United States. India needs both. So I would not see India going on India would never take the line NATO would take. That's for sure.
What's your prediction for the next few days, next few weeks?
Next few weeks, I think militarily the Russians may try to mop up They might try to dismantle most of the critical infrastructure, military infrastructure in Ukraine. They might try to consolidate a political solution as well, because one thing Russians also know: way in is easy, way out is very difficult. So they probably have, I'm sure, if Putin is as strategic as he is, he has an exit strategy as well.
Maybe next time we should talk about this element where we couldn't get this in. For me, personally, when I look at this whole thing, I'm once again convinced that the United Nations failed in this entire whole operation, because they were established to stop things like this occurring in the world. And here we are once again talking about war and all, and the UN is sitting in some corner sending in statement after statement, which is useless for anybody.
I can give a very short answer for that.
Yes.
The institutional structure had an anomaly installed in it. That is called the Security Council. The UN's precursor League of Nations failed because there was no such instrument. The Security Council is an anomaly because it exactly does what great powers want. So the UN functions well when things are smooth. UN is never made to function when there is a geopolitical crisis. It's never crisis proof. It can manage peace operations, but it can't manage crisis. It's never built for that.
Dr. Harinda Vidanage, the head of the strategic studies at the Kotelawala Defense University, thank you very much for sharing your ideas and views on this. This is not something that will end today, as most of us know that this will continuously go on. We have to see exactly how this will turn around, because we in Sri Lanka is closely watching as well, not because of what the powers are doing right now, but how it's impacting affairs that we are interested in, mainly the economy. How exactly will this entire whole saga impact our economy? Once again, thank you very much, Doctor, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mahieash, for having me. You should have a longer time.
Well, that's all the time we have for you tonight. Thank you very much for watching. This is our special report on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Have a good night.